On a solemn morning at Arlington National Cemetery, where heroes rest beneath marble headstones, no one expected the sacred peace to be shattered by hatred. Major General Angela Morrison stood at the podium, her decorated uniform telling the story of 30 years of service to her country. The distinguished black female officer was delivering a eulogy for her longtime friend and colleague, Colonel David Brooks, when an uninvited presence disrupted the ceremony. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Officer Brian Huxley, a 15-year police veteran with a hidden history of racial bias complaints, pushed through the grieving crowd. What happened next would expose the dangerous intersection of authority, prejudice, and power in modern America. In front of hundreds of witnesses, military personnel, grieving families, and children, Huxley drew his service weapon and aimed it directly at General Morrison's chest. The next few moments would not only change lives but spark a nationwide reckoning about accountability in law enforcement. This is the true story of how one decorated general's unwavering courage in the face of hatred led to a historic verdict that proved no badge puts anyone above justice. What unfolded that day would send shockwaves through police departments across America and force the country to confront uncomfortable truths about power, prejudice, and the true meaning of service. This is Stories Abode's new exclusive report about the day justice finally prevailed. The morning air hung heavy with grief as General Morrison's steady voice carried across the cemetery grounds. Her words painted a portrait of Colonel Brooks' dedication, a man who had served with distinction for over 2 decades. The assembled mourners, a sea of dress uniforms and black attire, listened in respectful silence. Professional military bearing couldn't mask the sorrow etched on their faces as they stood amid Arlington's endless rows of white marble headstones. The brass buttons on Morrison's uniform caught the weak sunlight filtering through overcast skies. At 57, her silver-streaked hair and battle-earned medals told a story of dedication that spanned 3 decades. She had earned every accolade through grit and determination, breaking barriers as one of the highest-ranking black women in the United States Army. Her presence commanded respect, something Officer Brian Huxley couldn't seem to accept. Huxley's movement through the crowd wasn't subtle. His black trench coat stood out among the formal military attire, his face twisted with an anger that seemed to radiate from within. Veterans in attendance would later testify that they recognized the look in his eyes, the same dangerous gleam they'd seen in combat zones. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was hallowed ground where America's heroes found their final rest. "You don't belong here," he snarled, his voice cutting through General Morrison's eulogy like a knife. Several officers tensed, their hands instinctively moving toward their ceremonial sidearms. Morrison, however, didn't flinch. She had faced enemy fire in Baghdad, led crucial missions in Afghanistan, and overcome countless obstacles in her rise through the ranks. Her composure remained unshaken. The moment Huxley drew his weapon, time seemed to freeze. His service pistol, meant to protect and serve, now pointed directly at General Morrison's chest. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Parents clutched their children close. Veterans reached for weapons they no longer carried, and several mourners dove behind nearby headstones. The honor guard, positioned near the flag-draped casket, maintained their posts with remarkable discipline, though their knuckles whitened around their ceremonial rifles. Morrison stood unwavering. Her posture remained straight, her gaze steady as she stared down the barrel of Huxley's gun. 2 decades of battlefield command had taught her that true courage isn't about not feeling fear, it's about standing firm despite it. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the distant sound of traffic from the Capitol, oblivious to the drama unfolding in this sacred space. "Sergeant, lower your weapon!" Her command cut through the tension, clear and authoritative. The same voice that had led troops through firefights now faced down a different kind of threat. But Huxley's grip only tightened, his knuckles white against the black metal of his pistol. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool morning air. Colonel Raymond Cole, standing at Morrison's side, tried to reason with Huxley. "Think about what you're doing," he warned, his own hand hovering near his holstered sidearm. "This is a funeral. Stand down." Cole had served with Morrison in Afghanistan, had seen her lead under pressure. Now he watched as she faced this threat with the same steely resolve she'd shown in combat. Captain Sean Alvarez, a decorated Marine with 3 tours in special operations, noticed something crucial: a slight tremor in Huxley's gun hand, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Alvarez had been trained to recognize these moments, those split seconds when determination wavered. In one fluid motion, honed by years of combat training, he lunged forward. The next few seconds unfolded like a tactical operation. Alvarez's hands locked around Huxley's wrist, forcing the weapon skyward just as it discharged. The gunshot echoed across Arlington's hallowed grounds, sending birds scattering from nearby trees. The sound seemed to shatter the very sanctity of the place, a violent intrusion into a space meant for peace and remembrance. More officers rushed forward as Alvarez and Huxley grappled. The struggle was intense but brief. 4 military personnel subduing Huxley, while others secured his weapon. They moved with a coordinated precision that came from years of training, each person knowing their role in neutralizing the threat. Even as they pressed him into the wet grass, Huxley continued his tirade. "She doesn't belong here," he shouted, his words revealing the ugly prejudice behind his actions. "This is ours." His face was red with exertion and rage, spittle flying as he continued to struggle against the restraints. But General Morrison wasn't finished. With the same composure that had earned her 2 Distinguished Service Medals, she returned to the podium. Colonel Brooks still deserved his tribute, and she would ensure he received it. Her voice never wavered as she continued the eulogy, though the words now carried additional weight, a testament to resilience in the face of hatred. The investigation that followed revealed a troubling pattern spanning Huxley's 15-year career with the Fairfax County Police Department. His personnel file contained 27 complaints of excessive force against minorities, incidents that had been systematically buried under bureaucratic paperwork. Internal affairs investigations had been cut short. Body camera footage had mysteriously malfunctioned. Witness statements had been discredited. During the 3-week trial in Alexandria, the courthouse became a focal point for national media attention. The gallery was packed daily with military personnel, civil rights activists, and law enforcement officials. Witness after witness recounted the terror of that day at Arlington. Junior officers described their shock at seeing a fellow law enforcement official turn violent at a funeral. Grieving family members spoke of their horror as a moment of remembrance transformed into a scene of chaos. Captain Alvarez's testimony proved particularly powerful. "I saw it in his eyes," he told the jury, his voice steady but charged with emotion. This wasn't about fear or confusion. This wasn't about feeling threatened. This was about hate, pure and simple. He came to that funeral with a purpose, and that purpose was to hurt someone simply because of who they were and what they represented. Surveillance footage from the cemetery played on screens throughout the courthouse. Frame by frame, it showed Huxley's deliberate advance through the crowd, his drawn weapon, the moment of chaos as Alvarez intervened. But perhaps most damning was Huxley's own interrogation tape, where his mask of professional conduct finally slipped. "People like her," he had said, his voice dripping with contempt. "They're changing everything, taking over positions they haven't earned. This isn't what America is supposed to be." The jury watched as he continued his racist tirade, seemingly unaware, or unconcerned, that his words were being recorded. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented evidence of Huxley's history of racial bias, his pattern of targeting minorities, and the system that had enabled his behavior. They showed how he had carefully chosen the funeral as his moment to act, knowing the military personnel would be unarmed, except for ceremonial weapons. His defense team's claims of stress and temporary confusion crumbled under cross-examination. Their attempts to paint him as a dedicated officer pushed to the breaking point by job pressure fell apart as more evidence of his long-standing prejudices emerged. Former colleagues reluctantly testified about racist comments he had made, incidents they had witnessed but never reported. The jury's deliberation lasted just 3 hours, remarkably short for a case of this magnitude. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, terroristic threats, and hate crime enhancements. Huxley sat motionless as the foreman read the verdicts, his face ashen, his hands trembling slightly. Judge Franklin Pierce's sentencing speech became instantly memorable. quoted in law schools and police academies across the country. Mr. Huxley, the judge declared, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades on the bench, you wore a uniform meant to protect and serve. Instead, you used it as armor for your prejudice. You aimed a weapon at a woman who has dedicated her life to this nation's defense. Today, justice removes that armor. The sentence, life in prison without possibility of parole, marked a turning point in American law enforcement. Police departments across the country could no longer ignore the cost of protecting officers who abuse their power. The blue wall had finally met something stronger, the weight of justice itself. The impact of Huxley's sentencing rippled far beyond the Alexandria courthouse. Police departments nationwide launched comprehensive reviews of their disciplinary procedures. The protect our own mentality that had shielded corrupt officers began to crack under public scrutiny. General Morrison returned to Fort Knox, where she addressed a new class of officer candidates. Power isn't measured by the weapon you carry or the badge you wear, she told them. It's measured by your commitment to serve something greater than yourself. Her words became a cornerstone of police academy training programs across America. The security footage from Arlington that day now plays in law enforcement training sessions, not just as a warning, but as proof that justice prevails when good people stand firm. Today, a small plaque marks the spot where Morrison stood her ground, bearing a simple inscription, "Courage knows no rank." This story reminds us that real change happens when we confront uncomfortable truths and demand better from those sworn to protect us. Help us continue sharing these powerful stories of justice and accountability. Subscribe to Stories Abode and join our journey to 2,000 subscribers. Together, we can ensure these important messages reach those who need to hear them most. Hit that like button and share this video to spread awareness about the ongoing fight for equality and accountability in law enforcement.